right, guys, welcome back. We are going to get through some asks today. I don't know if we'll get through all of them. I also noticed that I have some things to share that are just more like in messages and things people have sent me, but I'm not sure we're going to get to that today. So if not, then maybe I can do those when I get back from vacation, which would mean they'll come out after the alone video. But I got quite a few, so let's see how many we can get through here. Um, okay, Obadala 2. All right, thoughts on this random post by Scott Gimple, who almost never posts. Yeah, I always read into Scott Gimple's posts because you're right, they're very few and far between. That's a whole lot of apples on that sandwich, and that's just pretty much what it is. I mean, there's an apple reference, and honestly, it's not that many apples on the sandwich. I mean, they're definitely there. So it feels like he's going out of his way to pull out the apple symbolism. And even the side of the trailer here, it reminds me of the How the Harvest Gets Home trailer, which was from season 6 and had to do with the wolves, especially as we've got like the wheat here. So yeah, I think this could be a hint. I couldn't really say other than that because Scott Gimple is always so vague and so cryptic. So it's like, can we actually point to any kind of smoking gun? No, but that doesn't mean that he's not meaning something by it, right? So yeah, I think that's about all I have to say about that, but it's definitely interesting and I kind of like it. All right. This is a really no stupid questions. I can't find these images and it's driving me nuts because I specifically remember them. It's Carol, Daryl, and Rick that I remember most. They're standing in a factory and we're looking at them through broken glass and it looks like a broken mirror. That was real, right? Yes. And I went looking for these too, and I couldn't find them either. I think it was specifically during All Out War because what you were looking at was like the broken glass of the sanctuary. And they used those images to market that season. So it was probably for season 8. And I do remember the ones you're talking about, but I couldn't find them either when I Googled them. So if anybody has them or knows how to find them, then let us know. But it was definitely real for sure. So yeah, you are not crazy, I promise. All right. Hi there. I sent an ask about Emily announcing filming a movie soon around the time of the Paris convention. She mentioned she's taking a summer break and will be back at the end of July, early August. Now, I'm pretty convinced she's filming something in France because it was just announced that she'll also be attending another convention in, I'm not going to try and say that, Belgium on July 4th and 5th. She never said where this movie she's about to film will be at, but I mean, it's clear it will be in France or around it because she is sure spending a lot of time in that area. Also, in a TikTok she posted, she said she was practicing lines with a close actor friend, and my mind immediately went to Lauren. I don't know, guys. I really think we might be 100% right about all this France speculation and it being connected to Dead City. Yeah, no, I agree. It seems like Galadriel Jones told me something about this movie that she's filming, and I can't remember what it was now. I need to go back through my messages. So I will look for that and see if what I'm thinking of was related to this. But I mean, even if it's not, I agree. I mean, she's spending a lot of time in Europe, and we even said last year that she was attending a lot of conventions over there, and it just doesn't add up in terms of how much money that costs and why she keeps going over there. Now, of course, if she's over there filming something, then it's convenient to attend any conventions that happen to be in the same area. But yeah, that definitely suggests that she's doing something there other than just attending the conventions. So yeah, she's spending a lot of time there. She keeps posting about things she's doing there, and it definitely seems like there's some reason she's spending a lot of time over there. So here's hoping it is what we hope it is, right? But I agree. I mean, we can't say for sure, and we don't have a whole lot of proof, but it does seem very suspicious and very likely that we're right about it. So 100% agree. What have we got here? I've got some interesting news. It's been leaked that the title of Dead City 301 is Trillium. If you look up Trillium, it's a flower known for its medicinal purposes. And it is also commonly known as Beth Root. OMG, mind blown. If it's not happening, then I just don't know what to think about it. I just don't know about anything anymore. There we go. Okay, so yeah, I did see the titles. Here we go. 301 of Dead City is titled Trillium. Since a hospital will be a significant location this season, the Belleville, we suspect the title comes from the use of that flowering plant for its medicinal benefits, such as astringents, coagulants, expectorants, and uterine stimulants. According to Wikipedia, the root of the red trillium was used by various indigenous peoples of North America as an aid in childbirth, hence the common name birthwort or birthroot or Bethroot. Root tea was used for menstrual disorders to induce childbirth and to aid in labor, and the Cherokee peoples used a poultice of the whole plant to treat tumors, inflammation, and ulcers. So what jumps out at me here, I mean, it's, there's the obvious stuff, but coagulants jumps out at me because in Slabtown, we saw that they were using a deep vein thrombosis machine and also probably administering heparin, which is an anticoagulant. And most of us who believe in the bite cure theory, I mean, Walker blood, they have established in the show, is like sludge. It's a lot thicker than human blood, and it's like darker purple, and it's thick like Jello. And so that's why when you see, Daryl looking at things, he can tell the difference between human blood and Walker blood. Once you know, it's really obvious. And so we think, using the heparin and the deep vein thrombosis machine was a way to keep the blood from coagulating when they were trying to save someone from a Walker bite. Now, this is obviously the opposite of that. It is a coagulant, but that's what jumps to mind. And then, of course, uterine stimulants, all this stuff about birth. I mean, we do think that, Beth is going to be involved with children and babies. And, I've wondered if maybe, whatever the organization is, the CRM or whatever, if they will be specifically interested in pregnant women because they're studying the barrier between the mother and the child and, how or if the virus crosses that barrier. And so I think that this is really interesting and might be hinting at something for sure. And then, of course, the Beth Root. I mean, how can you get away from that? That's awesome. And I mean, it's one of those things where it could be a coincidence in any other show, but they didn't have to use a particular flower that happens to be called that. And they certainly didn't need to use it as the title of the episode. We know that they choose these things very specifically. So that's really encouraging. Birth root, also known as Trillium, is a genus of spring flowering woodland wildflowers characterized by 3 leaves and 3 petals. There's our rule of 3 as well. With common names like Waker robin and Beth Root. Native to North America and Asia, these slow-growing perennials are known for their medical or medicinal uses, particularly by Native Americans for childbirth and menstrual issues, and are popular in woodland gardens for their simple beauty, though they are slow to establish and face conservation threats. I won't actually read through all of these, but you can definitely look them up. So yeah, thanks for sending that in. I had read about the titles, but I hadn't gone too deeply into the research on Trillium, so that's super cool. I don't really understand the 17 days thing. Isn't 2 weeks 14 days? Yeah, it's not really about 2 weeks. It's that in The Talking Dead, which was after 509, Chris Hardwick asked Greg Nicotero, how long has it been at the start of 509 since the end of Coda, since we saw Daryl carry Beth out into the parking lot? And Greg Nicotero specifically answered 17 days. And I mean, I think you're hitting on it just right, because he didn't just say 2 weeks. He didn't say, a couple of weeks, or, 17 days is very specific, and it is 3 days more than 2 weeks. So that's why it's important, is just because it was so specific. And what that tells me is that they knew exactly what the timeline was, which means that there are things that happened during those 17 days, and they had them planned specifically so that they knew it took exactly 17 days between Coda and 509, what happened and what is going on. And that just is more of a hint that there's important things that happen there that we have not seen yet. So hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have more questions. Aaron says that Daryl is good at finding people. Maybe one day he'll realize it too. And in that same episode, Henry drinks moonshine. I don't know, just realized it while watching season 9. Yeah. It's funny when you rewatch and you see the way that some of these patterns line up. So yeah, that's super fun. And I think it's definitely a hint, Okay, next. All right, so while I wait for you to get to my Beth Root post, we had more insanity today. The titles for all of the DC episodes: Trillium, Haven, Emigrants, Found Lost, Imperialis, Genesis, Hourglass, Tenebrae. Seriously, so much to unpack here. I want to give a shout out to Atrium Regina Blue, who noticed that the first letters spell words, the flight, or either the fight or the flight. Yeah. That's insane and feels intentional, because if you look at past seasons of Dead City, all the titles are long, with the exception of the pilot, which is just called Pilot. All other episodes are multi-word titles. These are all single words that happen to spell other words. Yeah, that I agree. That's definitely intentional. The flight, everyone flies to France at the end, could be referring to Laurent and Ash, would also fit all the religious symbolism in these titles. Then look at the Imperialis before it. Imperialis is a flower that the tulip-like shape is flipped upside down. Maggie goes upside down in this episode, leading into the AU. They are also known as a symbol of loss because they are figuratively holding their head in sorrow over the death of a mythological or religious personage. Interesting. Speaking of a religious symbolism, see a theme here. Genesis is the episode that we know will be the AU with Beth in it. Oh, I didn't know that. Genesis. They're calling it Genesis, huh? If you look into the book of Genesis, it features a holy place called, drumroll, Bethel. Crazy. There's so much more to the titles of Genesis that many people are delving into right now, and I'm sure you will be flooded with asks about. Then we have the hourglass right after it, turning back time, inverting time, and this episode is written by Seth Hoffman. I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but missing 17 days, anyone? He could have actually written that or had a hand in writing those scenes back then. And the topper, the last episode titled Tenebrae. This is a somber Christian ritual right before the resurrection. It's a ritual where 15 candles are lit and each one by one put out after reading a psalm. The last one representing Jesus is kept lit but hidden behind a shroud representing his entombment. Then a loud crash noise is made to signal the earthquake and dark times that follow his entombment. Then the hidden Christ candle is brought out to cast a small, persistent flame, symbolizing the hope of the coming resurrection. Holy, you know what? On top of that, I can't help but notice the Dead City really didn't have strong religious themes before, but this is making it very clear this season will. And of course, Daryl Dixon has had extremely strong religious theming from the start. I'm going to say it again, but these shows are crossing over big time. Yeah, thank you. I had not dove very deeply into the titles. I have had people sending them to me and talking about them, but that really lays it out well. So we have, and I was kind of thinking about sort of a what do you call it, like a progression or a sequence. So we have a healing flower. We have haven, which is a lot like sanctuary. Emigrants are, a certain type of people. Found lost. I mean, just that alone. I mean, it's interesting that it's not lost found, it's found lost. I don't know if that is going to be because something is found and lost at the same time, or first it's found and then it's lost. And then, like you say, there's another flower. And Genesis, I didn't realize that was the AU episode. I hadn't put that together. So that's super interesting. And then, yeah, Hourglass and then Tenebrae. That's fantastic. And I feel like, I don't know, I'm going to have to look at this a little bit more because I feel like we may have even seen the sequence somewhere before. And I'm not saying I don't have anywhere particular in mind, but I feel like this is following a sequence that they may have followed before. And will be following again, symbolically here, right? So, because I'm just kind of thinking that, okay, so if Trillium represents healing, and then a haven is a safe place, emigrants is an interesting one. You hear about emigration, which means travel. So immigrants are someone who has come from a different land. Emigrants are leaving a land to go somewhere else, at least temporarily. So it's kind of interesting to say it that way, emigrants. And then found or lost. And then, like you said, it's another flower that maybe represents the world being turned upside down. And then Genesis, and then hourglass for time, and then resurrection. So, I mean, I almost feel like we could see this sequence in, Beth and Daryl in season 4, or maybe in the fall of the prison, or, you know what I mean? Like, I almost feel like this is a familiar sequence, and the titles are laying out how they're going to follow it. But I would have to look into it a little bit more to get into the nitty-gritty details of that. But it's really interesting, and these definitely are interesting title. And thank you for pointing out that they haven't done one-word titles before. I didn't even think of that the others were much wordier than this. So that also is signaling a change. And I mean, we've seen them do this before with other shows, other spinoffs. Like I remember when Morgan crossed over to Fear the Walking Dead, people noticed a change, like not just that he was going to be in it now, but the whole vibe of the show changed. And some people liked that and some people didn't. But it just shows that they're doing something intentionally moving forward, and that something about the season is going to be different than previous seasons. And we're seeing a lot of evidence of that. So yeah, thank you. This is very insightful. Thank you, Obadella, too. Okay, I was wondering about your thoughts on the Dead City trailer. I keep getting snagged on the scene where there's a blonde person getting off a boat, and the way the shot moves makes it look like Maggie is having some pretty intense emotions looking out over those boats. Now, I slowed down the shot on my phone, and it looks like that blonde person is a man, but I don't think it's a coincidence that they threw that in there. Also, I'm not 100% buying that it'll be a dream sequence or a flashback. I think it'll be a this is what it can be like now that I have Beth back sequence. Thank you for feeding my delusions. That's what I'm here for. Yeah, no, as I was reading this, I was thinking the same thing, just in, not that the blonde person was a man, but just that it's probably not going to be literal. The way that they splice trailers together, it's usually not. So I wouldn't think it was a literal scene that way, but they could be definitely foreshadowing by showing her look out over a boat, which suggests, you know, traveling somewhere, going to Europe, going across the ocean, some sort of voyage, some sort of journey, and that there's a blonde person there. And then, like you said, that she's having some sort of emotion. So I definitely think that that is something that they could be hinting at. It's probably not going to be literal in the show. And yeah, I hope this is what it can be like now that I have Beth back. I hope that's the case. So, I don't have a whole lot more to say about the trailer. I did watch it several times. It's a really fun trailer, and it makes it look really fun. But the other thing that me and my fellow theorists have talked about is the fact that despite knowing that there's going to be an AU, or whatever it ends up being, and having seen pictures and footage of Emily filming it, nobody's talking about it in terms of they're not showing it to us in the trailer. The outlets are talking about what the season's going to be like, but most of them are not mentioning it that much anymore. At least, I mean, they've mentioned that it's going to be there. Like we've been told that it's going to be there, obviously, but they're not talking about it in terms of the plot. And we're not getting like, oh, this is what Maggie's going to be doing. This is what Negan's going to be doing. Oh yeah, and Beth's going to show up. Like they're not mentioning it at all, which is interesting. They're playing that pretty close to the vest. So I'm very excited to see what that has in store for us. And it's one of the later episodes, so it's going to be hard to wait for it. But I'm excited. I'm very excited. So if you have specific questions about the trailer, I'd be happy to answer them, but I mean, we had kind of talked about the major symbolism before that, like the Statue of Liberty and the nose and everything. And so when I saw the trailer, I just didn't have a whole lot to add, or I didn't notice a whole lot more smoking guns. It just made me excited for the season. So if there's anything specific, feel free to send that in. Okay. There is a new long interview with Scott Gimple that was done, I believe, at the time he was at the camp convention in Georgia at the end of May. I have not gotten around to watching this yet, so I might need to come back to this. Let's see. Interesting for us is at 5813, where he talks about killing off characters. What he says here refutes what Emily had said about not knowing about it until the Coda script came out. Here, Scott Gimple says that all except one person, and it's not Emily, knew they were dying either at a meeting before the season or at least 3 to 5 episodes in advance, which is what TD has always speculated, I feel like. So here's more confirmation that she indeed knew about this. Of course, it's always possible that Scott is forgetting some details or fudging things a bit to make himself look better, since I see it's a constant criticism towards him online that he killed characters like Carl without giving the actors notice. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And this is something that we've actually known for a while. He's just reiterating it here. This is not the first time that he's talked about it. We all knew back in season 4 and 5 even that, at least for the big characters, probably not the small characters that were only in one episode and then got eaten by walkers. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the main characters that are going to be in more than 2 or 3 episodes. He would always call them into his office before filming started and tell them what their character was going to be doing this season. And so if they were going to get killed, they knew it then. They knew it before they started filming. And that would have been true of Emily too, because she was, not only had she been on the show, by season 5, she'd been on since season 2. So really she was going into her 4th season, 2, 3, 4, and then she was going into 5. And so she'd been there a long time. She was one of the main recurring characters. And of course, during season 5, she even got the billing in the opening credits with Chad Coleman. So there's no way they would have killed her off without telling her. And then we go back to that fun picture of her standing with Gimple and Kang, and she's looking really happy. But Scott Gimple is like doing this, what's going to happen kind of pose, And I think we've always thought that was a huge hint that she was excited about what was going to happen. So I can't imagine that she would have been that excited about, oh yeah, you're just going to get killed off in a stupid way, right? But he's also suggesting there's something mysterious about it. So yeah, I mean, I don't believe at all that he didn't give Carl notice. I understand that people say that online, and they even will tell you that they have something to back it up. But you guys, when people found out Carl was dying, I mean, I understand why they were upset. He is a favorite character from both the comic book and the show, and I was sad he died too. I didn't want him to get killed off, and I get it, but people were coming up with the most ludicrous things I had ever heard in my entire life. And when I would ask them to back them up, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we have details about this. We have references, and we know it's true." And I'd be like, "Okay, can you tell me what they are?" And they never could. And so you just got to understand that people make up crap online all the time. So I don't know who the one was who didn't know. I'm actually wondering if it might have been the guy that played Dale. I don't know if he said in the interview who it was, but I know that Dale, that actor, left fairly suddenly because he was angry about something that was happening behind the scenes. So I could see that being the case, that they were not able to give him notice because they weren't planning to kill him off. And that is well documented that that happened. But everyone else, even when the guy that played Jesus left, he kept asking Angela King to let him out of his contract, and she made him wait. She did let him out of it, but she said, "You need to give me, 5 or 6 episodes so that we can give you a good send off." So even with him, or other people who might have been asking to leave, they still made them wait long enough so that they knew in advance, right? So there's just no way that Emily didn't know. And I actually go over this quite a bit in the still video because there are at least 2 times that we can see that they already had Coda planned before they started filming season 4. Okay, they already knew what her arc would be when they did the Bethel hug in 401. They already had it planned out. And saying that the writers had it planned out and were putting it in, granted, does not automatically mean that Emily knew, but at least the writers knew and they were planning that arc. And why would you plan an arc that far in advance unless there was a specific purpose for it? Certainly, they didn't choose 2 episodes before to suddenly kill her off. They were planning that for a long time. But as you've said here, this also shows that there's just no way Emily didn't know. They all knew. I think everybody knew. I think because they were doing this big arc where she was going to go and then return, we have evidence that Andrew Lincoln knew about it. I think all of the main big characters, so we're talking Rick, Michonne, Carol, Daryl, Sasha, she knew. I mean, from what she says in the commentary on the DVD, she knew. So which probably means all the big characters, Tyrese and Father Gabriel and Abraham and Rosita, all of those actors knew about it. I'm positive they did. So it's just kind of something they had to say to misdirect by going, "Oh yeah, she found out in 507 she was dying in 508." No, it's absolute BS. So hopefully they will confirm that at some point, but it probably won't be until after she comes back because otherwise it would be too suspicious. And I still look at Glenn's death as a template for this because up until 701 aired, they were all still claiming that they had filmed an ending for every single one of them to die so that the actors wouldn't know. And then in the great big after party, TTD kind of thing. Remember, they were all outside and it started raining, but they did this huge show in an amphitheater and they talked about it. And then they admitted that all of them had known for more than a year about Glenn's death. And Glenn himself, Stephen Yun, had known for like 2 to 3 years that that was going to happen. So they were lying through their teeth up until the episode aired. So you have to understand that, okay? So I'm really hoping that once she returns, that they will address this and be like, "Yeah, this is actually what happened. We all knew it was happening. It got pushed back. It took longer than we thought, but we always knew this was going to happen." I think that they probably will confirm that, but we can't expect that until after it airs. So if this is the only thing in this interview, then fantastic. I will try to get around to watching it and let you know if I notice anything else. I just have not gotten around to watching this yet, but a couple of people have sent it to me. So thank you for giving us that tidbit. Where are you? I hope you're doing well. So much is happening. I'm sorry I've been gone for so long. I missed you guys too. Is it possible you could do a separate video explaining the rights of the TWD franchise with Netflix and AMC Plus? I don't, I'm assuming that's know anything about the business side of the industry like you seem to. I mostly want to know how it all plays a role with Beth, her return, and why they may be postponing it. At least that's what it seems like to me. EK not releasing her album that's supposedly heavily tied to Beth TWD at the time she originally said was a huge tell for me. Yes, I can do a video about this. I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say than I've already said, but especially if I'm going to be looking into the rights being for sale, then I will try to find out more information about this and see if I can explain it in a way that makes sense. And I hadn't really thought about this, but if the rights are for sale, I wonder if that is affecting her album coming out. I mean, we all think and hope that it's because, she's going to be on the show and it's more of a marketing thing, because that would make sense too. But it also could be that because they're selling the rights behind the scenes, they just need her to wait until the people who are holding the rights give her the okay or something like that. So that actually could play into it too, but I don't know that for sure. So yes, I will look into this, and it's probably going to be a few weeks before I get around to this video, but I am happy to research that for you. They stopped or finished filming for Daryl Dixon, and I'm annoyed because I still feel like they're just fucking with us, and she isn't coming back, and it really sucks. If she doesn't at least reappear in Dead City, then it truly was all for nothing. Sorry, I'm feeling very hateful. Well, we already know that she's going to be in Dead City. Okay, that's a given. She will be there. I mean, I guess maybe you mean Beth actually literally showing up, and we know it's going to be an AU or a dream sequence or whatever it ends up being. But the other thing is, just because they stopped filming doesn't mean she's not in it. We've gone over many, many, many times how they hide the characters that they don't want you to know about. So even if we didn't see her filming, to me that doesn't tell us anything. I still think that there's a very good chance that she is filming for it or has been. So I feel you. I'm sorry you're frustrated, but I think we just need to wait for it to come about, and I'm not too worried about it. Okay, we'll do this last one, and then we're going to wrap up for today. Hi, I don't know if you've answered this question, and if you have, you can totally ignore this or maybe point me to a post where you've answered it, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on Beth's return. Now that the main show has come to an end and the last season of Daryl Dixon's spinoff has been announced, and I believe Rick's spinoff is also done, not sure on that though, how are the chances for Beth being alive actually returning? If you ask me, do I believe Beth is still alive? Yes, I do, because of all the unreleased footage from season 5, and not ever having a funeral for Beth is a very big indicator, especially the fact that she was given Andrea's headshot and survived is even more of an indicator. So yes, I do believe Beth is very much alive, but do we really believe she's actually going to return to the TWD universe and is going to reunite with Maggie and Rick, Daryl, and possibly everyone else? I mean, like I said, the main show is over. Rick's spinoff is over, I think. Daryl's spinoff is coming to an end, and TWD is just generally coming to an end. So I just wanted to know how likely it is that we'll have Beth return. I know that TWD planned on doing 15 seasons, as Norman Reedus had a 15-year contract, and it all blew up because of AMC. And I believe they kind of split the last 4 seasons they would have planned, including Beth's return in those remaining 4 seasons, into spin-offs. But now that it's actually coming to an end, what points to Beth's return? What signs do we still have? How likely is it that now to believe that we're actually getting Beth back? And even more, how likely is it really that we'll get the Bethel romance all the Delusioners and Bethelers we're hoping for all these years? If you have answered all of this, please point me to a post where you have, but if you haven't, I would love to know your thoughts on this, because quite frankly, I'm getting a little worried about never getting Beth back. Anyway, I love your content and love what you do here, and much love and respect to you for keeping our hopes up and dedicating so many years to this account. You were the one who convinced me to believe in Beth being alive, and all your content is keeping my hopes up for her return. So thank you so much for what you have done over the years. It's incredible. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so I had to go look up an article, and here's the thing. Try to lay this out in a logical way. First of all, the Daryl Dixon spinoff very suddenly announced that they were wrapping up after season 4. We're pretty sure that they were not originally going to do that, and something changed. And the only reason to really do that is to push things back together toward a reunion show, because they had to wait for the legal statute of limitations to run out, and it's not really called a statute of limitations. They had to wait for, a period of time that was built into the contract, basically like 5 years after the show ended for all of the rights to revert to them. And it's just legal mumbo jumbo. But now we've hit that point. And so I think they decided to cut the Daryl Dixon spinoff short. And now we're heading toward the reunion show. But Scott Gimple has more or less confirmed the reunion show. We do not have a hard and fast date for it. Like, they're not saying that it's been greenlit. But let me show you this particular article. This is not even the one I was looking for. But Gimple, basically confirmed this, right? In fact, the article says, the Rick and Daryl's Walking Dead reunion show just got the best update, which is kind of a funny way to put it, okay? So he says, absolutely still a hope. He acknowledges that there are practical hurdles blocking any immediate crossover. It's very challenging for a variety of reasons, which have everything to do with 2026 production, but things change very quickly. And he did not limit his vision just to Rick and Daryl. The broader universe holds space for Morgan and Negan, though logistical nightmares persist, which I'm assuming means that the actors are very busy and it's hard to get them all together because they're doing other things. Daryl Dixon is wrapping up later this year, and people think that Norman penned what reads like a definitive farewell to the character. I think he was really just saying farewell to the European cast and crew because he's not going to be doing that show anymore. He's going to be moving to a different show within the TWD universe, and so it's just going to be a whole different thing, right? The timeline presents another obstacle. The Walking Dead boss fueled that speculation carefully. He has drafted multiple contingency plans, describing them as all sorts of garden of forking paths kind of plans. His timeline remains vague. It might be a minute, it might be tomorrow. I might be off at a retirement home, he said. Despite the uncertainty, his conviction remains or stays firm. I think we will eventually get there, and I think there's enough stuff to handle, source material, emotional, plot-wise, everything, that we could do something brilliant, okay? Gimple is not going to confirm it until they have an actual production date and AMC has approved it, okay? So he cannot say, yes, 100% we're working on this. He has to couch it as, we hope to work on this and we have lots of ideas and lots of plans. But to me, especially knowing how vague Gimple can be, this is confirmation, okay? They are working on the reunion show and it just might take a year or more to get it together. But we know that Andrew Lincoln was in talks to do Rick again. You guys, this is happening, okay? And this is everything that TD has said for a while. So I do think that between Dead City and hopefully Daryl Dixon season 4, we will get either a hint of Beth, a confirmation that she's alive, or maybe even see her in a big way. You know, here's hoping. But we do know that they're heading back toward a reunion show, which I said from the beginning was going to happen. I mean, we haven't seen the smaller characters like Father Gabriel and Aaron and you know, everybody else who's was like left behind at Alexandria, you know, Eugene and anyway, we haven't seen all of them, but I think most of them are going to be returning for the reunion show because why wouldn't they, assuming that they can, you know, get the schedule figured out. So anyway, this is all just to say in terms of your question that it's really not ending, okay? Yes, the spinoffs are ending, but they are working on the next thing. And everybody seems to be really worried that everything's going to get canceled before they can actually, you know, have Beth return or that it's just not going to work out. And there is all kinds of evidence all over the place that that is not the case. They are changing their format. So they're ending the spinoffs and they're moving back to a reunion show where everybody can be in it again. And I'm kind of assuming at this point that most of Beth and Daryl's arcs will play out there, which is not to say that she couldn't show up in season 4 and that we couldn't get some romance there, but especially in terms of the CRM and, you know, whatever they're working on in terms of, you know, a big revolution and a big battle against a bigger organization. I mean, they're not going to have time to do that in Daryl Dixon season 4. And, you know, it's really too small a scale to do that on because it's just focused on him and Carol. And so that's the kind of thing that they'll be doing in the reunion show, but I 100% think that Beth is going to be involved in that. So I think it's very realistic still that she will return. And they've been waiting for the right time. And I think that time is now upon us between, you know, Dead City. I mean, really, this is the first return we've had of Emily, even though it's, you know, if it's just the AU, it's not going to be literal. Still, this is the first time she's come back to the show. Right. And actually filmed and been in it. So even that is huge. And I don't think that they would be doing that if everything's ending and they're just shutting it down. Or if they did, it would be because they were doing all kinds of character cameos for the very end. Right. And neither of those things is applicable here. So I do think it's still very likely she will return. I'm assuming she will return. Let's see. I'm trying to address more of your questions here. We still have a lot of things pointing to Beth's return, and I don't have a specific video where I talk about this, but just go back over my YouTube account because I'm always talking about this, right? About different things that point to her coming back. We don't know when we'll get the Bethel romance exactly, but I do think we'll get it. I was going to say something about how likely, okay, so you say how likely is it now to believe that we're actually getting Beth back, and even more, how likely is it that we'll get the Bethel romance? Okay. You guys got to understand something because this is something that I'm not sure why people think this, but if they are bringing her back, we will get the romance. Like it would be not worth bringing her back if they weren't going to do that. Like that's I don't want to say it's the whole reason they're bringing her back, but it's what they planned from the beginning of season 4, if not earlier. So to think that she's going to come back, but they're not going to have a romance between her and Daryl doesn't make any logical sense. Okay, if they're bringing her back. Let's put it this way. If the show is continuing beyond what we have now, beyond the spin-offs, I'm telling you Beth is going to come back. Okay? There's no way she couldn't be. And if Beth is coming back, they will do a romance for her and Daryl. They wouldn't not. Okay? This is what they have been setting up since season 4. And probably you already have watched the still video and then watch the alone video that's coming out next. And hopefully that will be enough to convince you that everything that happened in season 4 and 5 was a foreshadow of what would happen when Beth comes back. And so, yeah, I mean, if suddenly the entire Walking Dead universe got shut down to where they were not making anything ever again, yeah, then maybe it would not be totally logical that we would see her. But that is clearly not what is happening, okay? They are planning for future shows. They are planning for future franchises. This is still one of the most in-demand shows in the world. And so, I mean, even what Gimple said about maybe he'll be in a retirement home. I mean, Gimple's probably still 20 plus years from retirement, which means he is planning to be working on the TWD universe for that long, right? So it's not going anywhere. And again, if it's staying around, Beth will return. If she's returning, there will be a romance, okay? I know that it sucks that it's been this long and we're still waiting for it, but I'm telling you, it'll be fine. We're getting there. So I unfortunately don't have a specific video, but like I said, just go back over the videos I have made because this is what I talk about in all of my videos is things that point to her return. Okay. So I hope that helps. And thank you so much for continuing to be on the journey and watch my videos. I really appreciate that. And thank you for the question. I do understand everybody's frustration and that it's been a long time, but I'm not worried about that. I still 100% think she is on her way and we're going to see her very soon. We're going to see her in Dead City. And I think very much that whatever we see in Dead City will probably give us a lot of direction and a lot of hope for what we're going to see next or where we can expect to see her next, hopefully. So that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about it. Even if we don't see her in a literal way in Dead City and it's just the AU or whatever it ends up being, I still think that we're going to get a lot of direction from that. So, all right, I am going to stop talking now. This is all the asks I currently have. Feel free to send in more, and I will look into some of the things you guys have asked me to look into and be back soon, hopefully with new videos. And the alone video should be going live in a few days. So thank you again, and everybody have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you soon.